Welcome to the Michael Blum Show, where we talk about things you don't want to talk about. We talk about sex. We talk about politics. We talk spirituality and substance abuse. Join us by calling 800-699-0980. Think, speak, and be heard. Here now is Michael Blum. Hey folks, it is me. Here I am. Hello, hope everyone's having a good time this week. I know I had a pretty good week this last week that just passed. Some unfortunate things during the weekend and all, but we're going to keep everything very, very light today. We'll talk about a couple of things, but our big deal is going to be the Beatles. It's the Beatles' 50th anniversary for the White Album, and we are going to have Susan Shumsky, Dr. Shumsky, joining us later on. She's an expert on the Beatles because she was there when all this stuff happened with the Maharishi Yogi, and she'll explain what went on there. I mean, I know there's all sorts of rumors and things like that, and there's some explanations to songs. So if you're a Beatle fan, this should be the show for you. I have to send my condolences to all the folks in Pittsburgh for experiencing the anti-Semitism that they did this weekend. It's horrible when things like this happen, you know, and there's been a rise in anti-Semitism throughout the campuses of the United States. I'm not going to make this a political issue other than to really say that there have been multiple murders in under various different presidencies. Probably the most under Obama, but that doesn't make a difference to me, really. What makes a difference to me is the politicization of it and the blaming of somebody for the workings of a madman. It's just stupid, and disgraceful, and unwarranted and unneeded, and helping nobody. The people that choose to do this, they have their own agendas and their own reasons why they choose to do this. And basically everything is if we can make it Donald Trump's fault, then that's what it is. You know, that's what we'll do. Just like the hurricanes that we had here in Florida, blamed on Trump. You know, he caused the hurricanes. He caused this guy, this raving lunatic, to go nuts. The response was very, very different when Steve Scalise was shot by that other nut that tried to take out as many Republicans as were playing ball that day. But, you know, no one in the media suggested that that was a president's fault because it didn't please the left to do so. And Bernie Sanders, for whether you like him or not, you know, called it out and said it's disgraceful and said what it is. He didn't go ahead and make stuff up to go ahead and blame people. So the main thing is, what do you do to fix these things? I don't know. It's a tough thing to fix. How do you fix hatred? I've said in various shows that you can get rid of Hitler, but you necessarily don't get rid of Hitlerian thought. And obviously it's pretty much there. That term Nazi and Hitler has been thrown around so much it's lost its meaning. I would bet most youngsters who have been indoctrinated through the university system probably have very, very little knowledge of the Holocaust or what. And we're going to take it from there. So let's give Susan a call.
Hello.
Hi, how are you, Susan?
I'm great. How are you?
Doing really well. I just got to get your volume up a little bit in my headset here, so I can hear you a little better. All right, good. So anyway, folks, we have Susan Shumsky on the phone. I don't know if the name is familiar to you at all, and I should actually give her proper accolades, which is Dr. Susan Shumsky. She's dedicated her life to helping people, and she helps them by allowing them and giving them methods and ways that they can actually take command over their own lives in very effective, powerful ways. She's the author also of 14 books, which is amazing to me because I can't conceive of writing a book, and she's been published by Simon Schuster, Random House, New Page, Skyhorse Publishing. She spent the better part of her life, about 50 years, teaching thousands of people about meditation, prayer, affirmation, and intuition. Her books have been published in several languages worldwide. Some of them have been #1 bestsellers on Amazon. They include Divine Revelation, Miracle Prayer, a whole bunch others, and the one that I think we're going to talk the most about tonight, which is called Maharishi and Me. Susan, welcome to the show.
Well, I'm really so excited to be here with you tonight, Michael.
I think we're going to have some fun. The first thing is that when I was going through some of the stuff on your website, I'm just curious. It says you were interviewed by Popular Mechanics. Is that true?
They came on a cruise that I was producing. It was called the Conspiracy Cruise.
Because I found it kind of interesting that they would be
They
the
do
you know
they do exposés. Popular
okay.
Mechanics does exposés,
I
and they
couldn't
decided.
go ahead.
So I produce these themed cruises.
Uh-huh.
They're always like spiritual awakening cruises of some variety or other. And I did one that was a theme of conspiracy theories, and that sort of thing. So Popular Mechanics basically came on to debunk it. That's why they came on the cruise.
To
And
give you grief, huh?
yeah, and Andy Wakefield was he was one of the speakers on the cruise. He's a very anti-vaccination guy, so they didn't like him.
Well, I'm not really a pro-vaccination guy too much. I always think less is best,
Yeah,
But
I would agree with that.
that's just me. And when I'm doing a little bit of research for the show here, I see there are a whole bunch of different articles you could read about the Maharishi Yogi. Some good, some bad. I've had some experience with followers of Prem Rawat. I'm not sure if you know the person,
Haven't heard of him.
but he's a biggie, kind of like a more modern day yogi, if you will. And I got to tell you that in the 70s, when I was in late 60s, when I was a teenager, in my formative years, if you will, I really thought that all of this guru, the yogi stuff, meditation, all that stuff was a real big bag of crap. I just had no belief in it whatsoever. I still have some difficulties with it. I've studied spirituality of a different type. I was involved with the Kabbalah centers for about over a decade. And I learned some things from there, but I have a feeling that their brand and the way they approach spirituality is probably a lot different than what you folks did in India way back when. So tell us a little bit of how you got started in this. I can't imagine that as a child you were in school and you said, I think I'm going to be a spiritual teacher. Maybe you did.
You're
How
right about that.
It could be.
No, you're very right about that. Yeah, it was the 60s, and I was a hippie, and I was living in the San Francisco Bay Area, and I went there to turn on, tune in, drop out, and make love, not war. So that's what I did. I was a flower child. And those of us who were flower children, we were seeking higher states of consciousness. A little misguided. We thought we would do it through LSD, listening to, following Timothy Leary and Richard Alpert, who later became Ram Dass. And they were telling us to read the Tibetan Book of the Dead and to turn off your mind, relax, and float downstream. All of these cliches from the 60s. So I was doing all of that. And I was really very sincere about trying to find higher states of consciousness. And it certainly didn't happen through LSD. As a matter of fact, I had a psychiatric breakdown, or I don't know what you call it, a mental breakdown from doing LSD. I guess I'm allowed to say mental breakdown because it's not politically correct, maybe, but I
Who
had
cares?
it, so I
This is
can
not a
call it
politically-
whatever I call it.
We're not a politically correct show, so I wouldn't worry
That's
about it. We
good.
actually call things what they actually are. I don't.
Right,
It's another thing I'm not
Right.
into.
right. So, yeah, I had a mental breakdown through LSD, but then I got cured through meditation. So it actually changed my life dramatically. And I had such amazing experiences through practicing transcendental meditation that I immediately wanted to become a teacher. I wanted to turn on as many people as I could to meditation. I started bugging all my friends and acquaintances, and they said, "Oh, shut up already. We've heard enough about this meditation stuff." So I was really gung-ho, and I ended up in India, in Rishikesh, where Maharishi was teaching teacher training courses at the time. He taught a few there in Rishikesh before he moved and had all his trainings in Europe. But in the beginning days, he was doing it there in India. So I went there. I was quite young because I applied to several several courses. I tried to go to the teacher training course several times, including onto the Beatles course, which I didn't know the Beatles would be there. But I did apply to that course and several others, but they kept telling me I was too young. Finally, Maharishi allowed some younger students to come to the class that was starting in January of 1970. So I went there and spent 6 months there. Became very enraptured and enamored with and enthralled with Maharishi. He was very charismatic to the point of being hypnotic. And really, I was completely bowled over by him and his energy, and also the wisdom that he talked, and the experiences of meditation that I had, which were profound and always have been. I've always been a big fan of meditation. So I had great experiences, and I ended up being on Maharishi's personal staff for 6 years and remaining in his ashrams for a total of 22 years.
Wow, that's a long time. That's a very long time.
Very long time, yes.
So what was that? What was that all like?
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, I loved meditation. It was very challenging to be on his staff. It was a combination of heaven and hell. Combination heaven and hell, really. Very extreme.
Let's split them up.
Extreme heaven and extreme hell.
Let's split them up then. What was heavenly about it? And then you can tell me what was hellish.
Yeah, so the heavenly part was the experience of being near Maharishi, which was an extraordinary experience. He exuded so much love. The love vibration that just came from him was, I never experienced anything like it before or since, really, because he exuded this tremendous amount of love and also exuded spiritual energy. So if you would get close to him and if he would look at you, really he would sort of transmit energy through looking at you. And this is traditional, by the way, in India. He's not the first person to have done this. This is, in India, it's traditional to transmit what they call Shakti, or spiritual energy, through a touch, or through some of them do it through blowing, like blowing. Some of them do it through their eyes. They transmit the energy through their eyes. So there's several ways that they do this, and he happened to be a master at transmitting a lot of energy, so you could feel these waves of bliss when you were around him. That's why people were always trying to get close to him, and they were competing to get into his room. It was actually quite intense, very, very intense, because everyone wanted to be near him. And so when you were with him, you would feel like you were the only human being in the world, and he cared about you. The love that he brought and the care that he brought towards you was not like any other person you've ever met. So it was very, and also he was always making jokes. He was always cracking up, making jokes. And the press called him the giggling guru. So it was fun to be around him too, because he was hilarious. So that was the heaven part.
So he could tell a good joke? Is that what?
Sure could, yeah.
All right,
so
that's heaven, and what was hell?
The hell part was, okay, so it's also a tradition in India, which people in the West do not know about this in general. In India, the tradition is for when a disciple comes to stay with a spiritual master, that they're coming there to transform, to be transformed, to change. And that change is not necessarily a comfortable experience. Maharishi always called himself a carpenter, and his disciples were like blocks of wood. So if you're a block of wood and you're getting carved up by a carpenter, I mean, obviously you're going to become something beautiful, a magnificent piece of artwork, obviously, if you're being carved up, and the carpenter is going to create something different out of you. But the carving up process is pretty difficult, pretty dicey. So it would be I would call it something like open ego surgery, where it was like a drill master. It was like a Marine Corps drill master who's working on you to transform you and make you, help you to attain your full potential. But as he's doing that, your ego is being slammed, and sometimes your ego is being praised, and then the next day it's being slammed, the next day praised, the next day slammed. And also, you would do all these crazy projects that he would tell you to do. And then you'd work, and then he'd say it was like the most important thing in the universe, and it had to be done immediately. And he imparted gravitas to everything. Everything was the most important thing that was going to save the world from sure destruction. So everything you were working on was the most important thing. And then you would finish it, supposedly finish it. And then you bring it to him, and then he would want you to fix it and change it and redo it. And this would go on and on and on and on, over and over and over again. You'd always have to make improvements. Nothing was ever done. Nothing was ever good enough. And sometimes you would work all night to complete something, and then in the next morning you'd try to show it to him, and he wouldn't be interested. And he would wave you off until later, and later would never come. So he kind of drove everyone out of their minds. And in fact, that is a tradition of India, is that when a spiritual master is working on their disciple, they're driving them out of their minds for the purpose of God to enter into that person.
It's funny, when
I was
studying a spirituality, people used to say it was brainwashing, and the teachers that I had at the time said, well, it is we're going to get the filth out of your brain.
That's right.
And, it's very, very similar. Some of the things you're mentioning, I've heard before, and they're rather similar to what I was doing for a while, too. There was a story also that I was told about someone who wanted to become spiritual, and he would keep on going to his teacher and say, can you teach me? Can you teach me? And he would be ignored, and he was ignored for a long, long, long time. Finally, one day he asked the teacher, can you teach me about spirituality, about intuition, about the afterlife? Can you explain those things to me? And he said, why don't you come with me to the river? And the guy's saying, wow, I'm excited. Good, he's going to finally teach me something. This should be awesome. It's going to be amazing. So he goes down to the river with him, and he says, okay, now do you trust me? And he goes, yeah. And the spiritual master takes the guy, pushes his head underwater, and the guy's underwater saying, it's so beautiful, it's so peaceful here. But then after like about 30 seconds or so, he's saying, I'd like to get some air. And as he tries to get up, the master keeps on pushing his head underneath the water for like another 30 seconds, 35 seconds. Finally, the master pulls him up, and the guy goes, oh, gasping for air. And he says to him, when you want spirituality like you want air, let me know.
Right. That's right. Yeah, that's it.
So
so there's another story. Okay, so Milarepa was a disciple of a Tibetan Buddhist master named Marpa, and when Milarepa went to Marpa kept promising that he would give him the secret teachings, but he never would. And he would have him build a house of this one shape, like a square house. And then after he was done building it, he would tell him to dismantle the house and put all the bricks back and all the dirt and everything back to where it originally came from. And then he had him do a house of a different shape, like triangle and a round, and just different shapes of houses. And in every case, he would have him dismantle it right away. It's like the Tibetan sand paintings, where they're not paintings, sand, I don't know what they're called, sand mandalas. Mm-hmm. They're mandalas, where the Tibetan monks will take maybe a week to create this gorgeous mandala using sand, and they're pouring the sand on a platform, and this beautiful, beautiful mandala is created. Very intricate, takes, like I said, about a week to make. And then when they're done with it, they just brush it away. And the idea is the evanescence of life. And Maharishi was like that. It was like we were learning lessons in futility all the time. He would have us do something, and then it would come to naught. Mm-hmm. It was like it always would just get dismantled. Mm-hmm. So he wasn't interested in actually physical things. He was interested in helping us to attain higher consciousness. That was his only motive, as far as I could tell. When I was with him, at least that's what I felt.
It's interesting because there's also a story I heard about a spiritual leader who says, I want you to go down to the base of the cliff here, and there's a giant rock that I want you to push the rock. And so the guy goes down there and he's pushing and pushing. He does this for hours and hours, one day, the next day, hours, hours. Finally, the spiritual master walks by and he says, I've been pushing this damn thing and I can't get it to move. And he says, I didn't tell you to move the rock. He says, I told you to push the rock. And so that was the spiritual adventure of this particular person. What I've come to find, though, too, is that although you say he wasn't interested in the material things, would you consider him to have been a pretty good businessman?
Well, he knew how to promote himself. Yeah, he was. He made himself quite famous by appearing on the Tonight Show a lot and Merv Griffin. He got himself onto the cover of every major magazine at the time. He was extremely famous in the 1960s, and 1970s. And yeah, he promoted himself very well. And also he focused on establishing something, establishing an organization so that whatever he was teaching would be perpetuated. So he was very good at creating things that would be long lasting, yes.
I tried, it was suggested to me, and I went with my wife to go ahead and check out TM. And I never went through with it because, not that I was turned off, but I didn't really buy it all because at the end of this intro lecture, it was very costly for two people to do, something like $1,500 a person. And they wanted us to come back with flowers and fruits and gifts. And, I'm just not into that kind of stuff, I know it's helped a million people, so I keep very, very open-minded about things. I think that certain things work for certain people and certain things don't work for people. I don't know if you agree. Do you think that his teachings are for everybody?
Well, I mean, the fact is I practiced the TM meditation for 22 years, and it was great for me at that time. And now I do another form of meditation that I like better. But I think that TM is a very good practice because it's easy to practice. I think just about anybody can do it as long as they follow the instructions. It's really not hard to do. It's very simple, and it does work. It does have benefits. It actually takes you into a state of very deep relaxation and inner peace, and it's been scientifically verified to have a lot of benefits. So I think it's a great practice. I've tried to tell people to go and learn it if you want, and it might help you, especially people that are very stressed. I tell them to go learn TM because it can really reduce stress and help them to relax tremendously.
Well, it's funny because that's when I went, is when I was very stressed.
Mm-hmm.
It's been about 4 years ago, actually 5 years ago, my brother was diagnosed with leukemia and he died a year after his diagnosis. And it was just very, very stressful for me.
Oh my goodness, and yes. I'm sorry to hear that.
Yeah, it's terrible. It's like a loss that it's always there.
Yes.
And the spiritual teachers I was going to at the time said, look, we don't really know everything. And basically whatever happened to him is probably the best thing for his soul. And I just thought to myself, bullshit. Best thing for his soul is to have leukemia. And so I can get rather nasty. So I said to the guy, hey, look, I said, before he dropped dead, he fell on the floor and broke his collarbone. Was that part of the plan too? He needed to break his collarbone before he died from cancer so that his soul would be better?
Well, it's very difficult when we see these things happening to people, and they're such good people, and we don't really quite understand why these things happen. Sure. So it's a big dilemma. Free will is a big dilemma, and the idea of bad things happening to good people, that's a dilemma. It's just part of the human condition that we have to somehow deal with, and it's very, very difficult to deal with these things.
Sure it is. And so, I believe pieces of it, but not the whole pie, I believe that,
sure.
I believe that there obviously is a creator. I think the Creator, maybe there
Mm-hmm.
is a plan for us. I think we have absolutely no control over it, very little control over it. I think the only thing that we can do in terms of free will is pick who we're with, pick your friends, who you hang out with. But other than that,
Mm-hmm.
I don't know how much free will we actually really do have in life. And in the Old Testament, it says, "I am God; I do not change."
Mm-hmm.
So everything, so the idea of going and praying and saying, "Oh, I need health," or "I want my money," or "I need this or that and the other thing," first of all, to me, that's kind of stupid because you can want all the things in the world that you want and become ill. So
That's right.
it's not really about what you want; it's about what you need, and you really don't know what you need. No one,
Yes,
no
I
one really
agree.
knows really what they need. So,
Mm-hmm.
I stopped going to temple. I mean, their idea of meditation basically was prayer. And again, they said prayer has nothing to do with the Creator. It has to do with you. It has to do with trying to make you a better person because that's the key. They said people always say, "Well, how come bad things happen to good people?" And the answer to that is, who said you're supposed to be a good person? Why do you think that's the goal? The goal here is to be a better person than you are, is to transform.
Yeah.
And I don't know if this is similar to the Maharishi. It probably is because I think all spirituality probably has some pretty common basis, for why they exist and why they keep on going as they do.
Well, one thing that's interesting is that the philosophy of ancient India is very similar to Kabbalah. They have very similar ideas about the beginnings of the universe and the idea of the what they call in India, which is the Bindi point, the point
The
singularity, if you will.
singularity. Hmm.
And that's in both of those traditions. And yeah, the idea of the unchanging, absolute, undying, unborn oneness, which is underlying everything.
Yeah,
It's
and
very similar philosophy.
it's fascinating to read about it and learn about it because it really,
Yes,
if nothing else, it's a really wonderful philosophy. I mean, if you don't, the people who I studied with, this was their lives. I'm sure very similar to the ashrams. These guys were not just talking about it in an intellectual sense. They were trying to, as best they could, live it on a daily basis. And
yes.
you could see them because they were human beings also. And you see sometimes when these things just become kind of nutty. And so basically, I feel that I believe most of what I learned, but I don't think we really have the power to change anything other than ourselves. That's about it. I don't think you're going to be able to will away or pray away a cancer. I don't think you can go ahead and pray for more money and then it comes to you. So in terms of those materialistic things, I'm not really a big believer of them.
Well, I mean, prayer is simply intention. It's actually every thought that you think is a prayer because every thought that you think, every word that you say, and every deed that you do, you could call it a prayer because all it is intention. And when you follow these intentions and these choices, then that is creating your future, creating your destiny. In other words, we make choices, and through our choices, we create our lives. We create what profession we're going into, we create what school we're going to, who we're going to marry. All these choices that we make in life determine our destiny. So we are determining our destiny ourselves through our thoughts, through our words, and through our deeds.
So there's a vast similarities, it seems, between what I was doing and what you did as well.
Yeah, yes, for sure.
So
Definitely.
the Beatles get involved, and I don't think it was for a long period of time, was it, that the Beatles were actually involved?
They were involved. They were involved with Maharishi starting on August 24th of 1967 when they met him at the Park Lane Hilton Hotel in London. And they met him afterwards after the lecture. They were very impressed by the lecture, and they said that they had been trying to reach higher states of consciousness through LSD, through drugs, just like I was doing. My life was very parallel to theirs. And it didn't work out too well for them, but they wanted to have higher consciousness. And Maharishi said that, the youth, it's good that they're trying to seek these higher states of higher consciousness, but they are misguided with the drugs. So he invited the Beatles. He said that tomorrow I'm going up to Bangor, North Wales, and I'll be teaching a 10-day retreat. So why don't you come and you'll learn transcendental meditation there. And so they said yes. And so for the first time in their life, the Beatles went by public transport on a train to Bangor, North Wales with Maharishi. And so did Mick Jagger and Marianne Faithfull went there also on that same train. And they traveled up there. And the next day they learned TM at this retreat. They were going to stay for 10 days, but unfortunately they only stayed for 2 days because Brian Epstein died on the Sunday. It was 2 days later that he died. So they had to go back to London because he was their manager, and he's the one that really created the Beatles. He created their look, he created their sound, he created everything about them, and he's the one that made the Beatles into the Beatles. So it was very devastating for them that Brian Epstein died. But they continued to meditate, and they were very keen on it. In fact, they wrote that song Across the Universe that was very much about TM, and it had the phrase in it, Jai Guru Deva, which means I hail to the divine guru, the divine preceptor, which is what Maharishi, it was a phrase that Maharishi used all the time. Instead of saying hello or goodbye, he would always say Jai Guru Dev, because he was talking about his own guru, his own teacher. And he was giving props to his teacher through that phrase. So they put that in that song, Across the Universe, which was recorded before they went to India. And then Maharishi invited them to go to India in February of 1968. So they went there. Ringo stayed only for 10 days. Paul stayed for 5 weeks. And George and John stayed for 2 months. And so they were there, and they were really quite keen on TM and on Maharishi from, like I say, August 67 till April of 68. But then they had a falling out. John and George had a falling out. But then later, for example, recently, in the last decade or two, Paul and Ringo have been big supporters of the David Lynch Foundation, which is the foundation created by that Hollywood director, David Lynch, who, so he created this David Lynch Foundation, and that teaches TM, and they have to raise a lot of money, so they do a lot of benefits for that. And Ringo and Paul have participated in that. And also, sometimes they meditate, and some of the Beatles did continue from time to time to meditate, even after they had their falling out with Maharishi.
Yeah. Now, I would imagine that John was probably the toughest one to deal with.
Oh yeah.
Like I said, I did pick up an article or two here, and it mentioned something about Brian Epstein dying, and someone asked them what did he say about it, and this is a quote. He sort of was saying, "Look, forget it, be happy," and then he added, "What an effing idiot."
Yes, that's what John Lennon told the Rolling Stones. When he spoke to the Rolling Stones, I think it was in like a Rolling Stone magazine. I think that was in 70 or 71 that he made that quote. And he was still very angry at Maharishi. It's true. He definitely was disillusioned, and he got very angry, and he wrote that song Sexy Sadie, which was it was originally called Maharishi, and it had several expletives in it, which I can't say over the air, and it was really a very nasty song. But George said to him, "You can't say that, are you crazy?" So he changed the lyrics, and he made it into Sexy Sadie instead of Maharishi. It was supposed to be Maharishi, what have you done? You made a fool of everyone, and so on. But it ended up being Sexy Sadie.
And it would have seemed to me that the one who followed the most was George Harrison.
Yeah, I mean, George was, it was actually Patty Boyd who first, George Harrison's wife, was the first one to learn TM. She learned in February of 1967, And then she told George about how it had changed her life and how profound it was. And he said, well, I want my own mantra. So when they went to the Hilton, that's what he asked Maharishi. He said, I want to get my own mantra. And so that's why Maharishi invited them to come up to Bangor, North Wales, so they could learn TM. So they basically followed George in that respect, the other Beatles. Yes. And then later on, George wrote a song called Not Guilty. And in that song, he said, hey, it's not my fault that I got you all involved with TM because they were pissed at him. And also, they were not very nice to George. I mean, they never gave him a lot of play on the albums. He only would have like 1 or 2 songs on every album. And he was really much more talented than they gave him credit for. So there was some conflict about that in their relationship.
What was let me see, some of the reasons that I read that the Beatles left had to do with Mia Farrow.
Actually, it had nothing to do with Mia Farrow, but I'll tell you, there's 3 reasons why the Beatles left India. It had nothing to do with Mia Farrow simply because Mia Farrow had already left India a month before they left. She left on March 7th because she had to get back to London to make a film called Secret Ceremony with Elizabeth Taylor. So she could not stay on, even though she liked it there and she wanted to stay, especially with the Beatles there. It was part of her publicity plan, you know, to get a lot of reporters and press for being there with the Beatles. But yeah, she had to leave because she had to go make this film. And a reporter met her when she got off the plane and in London, and they asked her, well, you know, was it a scam or was it real? And do you feel that you were being conned? And she said, absolutely not. I was not being conned. It was one of the greatest experiences of my life. However, yes, it is true that Maharishi had made a pass at her at some point. It was on her birthday, actually, on February 9th of 1968. And it freaked her out really bad, and so she kind of fled the ashram for a little while, but she came back.
It's odd because in the Kabbalah centers of late, there was a few teachers who were taking advantages of students, and so they lost a great number of people because people became concerned with the fact of, well, where is my money going if I'm giving them donation and all that? Is it going to hide the fact that you have some inappropriate action? So they started to lose a lot of money. You know, it's funny. Sex is one of the sex food, grandchildren, some of the most enjoyable things in the world. And if you abuse, sex can just get you into trouble, you know? And
certainly these days, it's become very forefront in our society these days with the Me Too movement going on now.
That's for sure.
Yeah. So yeah, there were 3 reasons that the Beatles left that let's say John and George left Maharishi in a huff, because the other Beatles had left long before that. Ringo left after 10 days. Paul left after 5 weeks because they had other things they had to do. They had to get back. They had to go home. But yeah, so one of the main reasons that John and George left was because of a film deal that went south. So the Beatles, Maharishi promised John and George or Apple Corps, that they could make a film about him and about his guru and transcendental meditation. He said they would have exclusive rights to this film. But he gave exclusive rights to somebody else. He had done that the year before. He had given exclusive rights for Charlie Lutz, who was the leader of his organization in the United States, to negotiate a film deal. And they did. They negotiated one with 4-Star Productions of Hollywood. And so they're all in India, and Neil Aspinall comes to negotiate the film deal for Apple Corps. Neil Aspinall was the manager of the Beatles at that time, one of the managers. So he showed up in India and made this deal. And then a few days later, Charlie Lutz showed up with a contract in his hand that gave 4-Star Productions exclusive rights to film Maharishi for the next 5 years. And then what happened is one morning, uh, John gets out of bed, opens the door to his bungalow, and what does he see in front of him? He sees a cameraman and a director yelling, action. So he and George are meant to be two-bit players in this four-star Hollywood production film that they didn't know anything about.
That's crazy.
And so they refused to leave their rooms, and they would not go to the lecture hall where the cameras and the director and everybody was set up in the lecture hall. They refused to leave their rooms. So that was the one main reason why they got very disillusioned and very upset, because when that happened, they thought, well, what's this shady deal going on that we don't know about? And is he just using us for publicity? And what the heck is going on? So that was one reason. And another reason had to do with a woman who Maharishi made a pass at. Her name was Rosalind Bonas. It was not Mia Farrow. Yeah, he did make a pass at Mia Farrow, but that's not why the Beatles left. They left because of Rosalind. Rosalind told everyone in the ashram that Maharishi had made a pass at her, and the Beatles were very upset by that. They were very disillusioned by it because Maharishi claimed to be a celibate, a life celibate. So that was another reason.
So there are a whole bunch of reasons. It's weird because you said one of the reasons that they had to leave is because they had to get back. And,
well, Ringo and Paul. It was only those two, yeah.
My point is Get Back.
Oh, Get Back, yeah. Well, Get Back is an interesting, if you want to hear an interesting story about Get Back. Would you like to hear a story about Get Back?
Absolutely.
Okay, so Terry Gustafson, he was a TM teacher from Berkeley, where I was living at the time. And he went to India, and he was there on the course, same course that the Beatles went to in India. And one evening, Terry ran across John outside the lecture hall. Terry was from Tucson, Arizona, and he went to California and smoked some grass, and just like the lyrics of the song, Get Back. And he was a forest ranger in California. And then, and he was taking LSD like for 6 months every week until he realized that this isn't quite the answer. So he ended up learning transcendental meditation, went to India. So he came across John one night outside the lecture hall, and he described John as dressed in this crazy outfit. He had on these bell-bottom pants and this red sash and this paisley purple cape. And he said his eyeglasses had lights strobing on and off, and his hair was dyed 7 different colors, and he was wearing these green curly Aladdin-type shoes with toes curled up. And Terry was dressed in khaki pants and a button-down shirt, looking very conservative with short hair. So John says to Terry, he says, "Look at me. Look at you. One of us don't belong here. Get back to Tucson, Arizona. Get back to where you once belonged." And every time he saw Terry throughout that course, he would always tease him and say, get back to where you once belonged.
So there's a reason for the Beatles' madness and all that. Was the Maharishi successful in weaning them off of LSD?
They stayed off of drugs for about 5 minutes, yeah. But when John, as soon as John got back to, the minute he got back to London, after his stay with Maharishi, he started taking drugs again. And in fact, 1969, the entire year was heroin fog. Him and Yoko in heroin fog. And that was their life. Majorly addicted to heroin.
Major drug addicts. You know, it's so weird because you'd figure from looking at at their garb and what they used to wear, I mean, all that stuff was called psychedelic, and that meant psychedelic drugs. So it's odd that basically they were trying to get off of that, and yet they appeared at the same time as being very, very into it. I'm probably in and around.
Oh, they were very much into it until they learned TM. In fact, Revolver, Strawberry Fields, those were, they're basically drug albums. They're about LSD, most of them, you know. So definitely, yeah, they were into LSD and they took it heavily for a long time.
I could never do it. I had, I was around during that drug experience, late '60s, early '70s. I graduated high school in '68, and I remember working with a friend of mine who took some LSD. And we were sitting at an indoor pool, and all of a sudden he looks very, very disturbed. I say, "What's going on?" He goes, "I can't sit here." I said, "Why?" Well, if you're in an indoor pool, it's kind of like a gymnasium. He said that the sounds were starting to just multiply and multiply. That.
Oh, yeah.
And then he said
Yeah.
he was looking at the ceiling, and there were little stains on the ceilings, and the stains started to move around. And I said, who the hell would ever want to get involved? I think my mind has expanded quite enough, thank you. I didn't see any need to do a hell of a lot more, but I guess there are other people too. Now, you mentioned three reasons why the Beatles left.
Yeah.
I did come across an article that I think it was the Maharishi who said that the reason they left is that he couldn't get them off the drugs, that the drugs were just...
Okay, so this is reason number 3. Reason number 3, what happened was it was 1991, and Deepak Chopra was very close to Maharishi at that time. In fact, people probably don't even know this, but Maharishi is the one force that made Deepak Chopra famous. He actually got all of his followers to buy Deepak's book to launch him into best-selling status. He gave Deepak ghostwriters to write his books for him. He was promoting the TM organization. He was going around promoting Ayurveda, which Maharishi was trying to promote that, also Ayurvedic medicine. And so he was Maharishi's golden boy. So he had a lot of access to Maharishi at that time. In 1991, George Harrison contacted Deepak and said that he wanted to meet with Maharishi, and could he do that? So Maharishi was living in Vlodrop, Holland at the time, in the Netherlands. He was living there. And so Deepak and George traveled by plane and went to Holland, and they had a meeting. So George walked into the meeting, gave Maharishi a flower, and there was silence. And then after a while, George said to Maharishi, "Maharishi, I came to apologize." And Maharishi said, "For what?" And George said, "You know why." And Maharishi said, "Tell Deepak the story." So George proceeded to tell Deepak that when they were in India, there were members of their contingency, members of their party, that were taking drugs and drinking alcohol in the ashram, which is very much prohibited, in not only in the ashram, but in the entire town of Rishikesh and Hardwar, in that entire area. It's a sacred place, and none of those things are allowed there. In fact, they don't even sell meat there. It's completely vegetarian. They're not allowed to have eggs or meat or sell that at all there. So when that happened, Maharishi became very angry and asked the Beatles to leave. That's what Deepak Chopra reported to the Times of India. So that was the reason number 3 why the Beatles left India in a huff.
Is there any truth to the rumor that at some point in time the Maharishi wouldn't see people anymore, that his doctors told him he can't actually be with human beings, that he needs to be separated and separate, and he did whatever interviews and whatever teaching through some type of closed-circuit television?
It's very true that at the end of his life, he wouldn't see anyone except for his most intimate assistants who took care of him. He would not appear in public. That's because for the last many years of his life, he was in a wheelchair. He could not walk. And he did not want to appear in public. He didn't want people to know that he was incapacitated.
Ah, so he has some ego too.
I don't know. I can't judge. All I know is I'm just telling you the facts. He He was in a wheelchair for decades of his life, the end of his life, and that's why he never saw anyone. He would see people through closed circuit TV. Yeah, he'd see people on video feed or closed circuit TV or whatever you want to call it. Yeah, that's how he would meet people.
So we're coming up, I guess it's the 50th anniversary of the White Album.
Right.
One of my
50th anniversary of the White Album. It was released on November 22nd of 1968. And it's going to be reissued on November 9th of right here, coming up.
Yeah, next month.
Next week.
Oh, week and a half. Yeah,
Next
very,
week.
very cool.
Yeah.
One of my favorite albums. I mean, I don't know. There's a group called the Fab Four. I don't know if you've heard of them. But they're a group of studio musicians from New York.
Yeah.
Very, very heavy duty. And they are like the definitive Beatles band, but I mean, to the horns, the strings, and all that. And they're like heavy duty New York guys. If you can catch them, it's worth it. The Fab Four. Some of the people in the band one is like Willie, who was David Letterman in the David Letterman band. He was the bass player. Jimmy Vivino, who actually runs Conan's band on his show. So these were some heavy-duty guys that just really loved the Beatles. So
wow,
it's very exciting performance if you can ever see it, called the Fab Four. Tell us something about the White Album that we don't know. I mean, I'll tell you.
Yeah. Okay. Let's go on.
I was just going to say one of my favorite things from that actually was Revolution Number 9. Was that long collage?
Right.
So that I really enjoyed that. I thought most of the songs were good. But that one kind of stuck with me, and the slower version of Revolution, I think, was on that one.
Right.
So give us some insight into that, because I know that's what you do and what you're expert in.
Right. So, okay. So the album itself, the cover, that was Donovan's idea. When they were in India, at least Donovan claims this, when they were in India, he told the Beatles, you're so famous that on your next album, you don't have to have any image on the cover. It could just be blank. And so he claims that that's where they got the idea of the White Album, was from him.
Just blank, and it was the embossment in it that said the Beatles.
Yes, the Beatles. That was it. It's called the Beatles. The album is not called the White Album. It's called the Beatles. So, I could talk to you about some of the songs that are on the album. You mentioned Revolution. So, Revolution was about Maharishi's philosophy. Maharishi believed that, and he would always say that in order for a forest to be green, the trees must be green. In order for the world to be at peace, people must be at peace. So he saw that it was like a bottom-up kind of thing. I mean, we call it bottom-up now. In other words, it has to be that individuals radiate peace, and thereby the entire world is at peace. And he claimed that as a small percentage of the population, if a small percentage would meditate, that the world would be at peace. And his main goal was to create a world at peace. So Revolution is about this particular subject. It's about, you tell me it's an institution, you better free your mind instead. And you say you'll change the Constitution. We all want to change your head. So he was trying to say that, John Lennon was trying to say in the song, that you're not going to create a change, a positive change in the world through signing treaties, through having wars, certainly not through having wars, through legislating peace. You can't do it that way. People have to become peaceful. And this is Maharishi's philosophy. So they got that from Maharishi, and then they wrote about it. But it was also part of the culture as well, because of the fact that we were war protesters back then. The hippies, we were all, flower children. We were war protesters. We didn't believe in the Vietnam War. We wanted peace. So that was what Revolution's about.
It's odd because in my studies it was a concept like you, and it's really cool that you say that. It says people must be at peace for there to be peace. We looked at things as being, if you get enough people involved spiritually, eventually you will reach a critical mass.
Right.
Is what the
Exactly.
Kabbalists actually would call it, where basically the scales just flip. And
That's exactly what Maharishi said, and it was called the Maharishi effect. The Maharishi effect was something that Maharishi, came up with, and this whole idea that if you have enough people meditating a certain critical mass, it's like the 100th monkey effect, kind of, you know. So you're going to create a world of peace. And he proved it through doing a lot of experiments and doing statistical analysis on those experiments. He would send like hundreds of people to a war-torn area or to a crime-ridden area, and then watch and see how the statistics would change. If people meditated together in large groups, it would create greater peace in the atmosphere. And the crime rate would go down and the war would end, or at least have a break in the war.
yeah, well, that's the idea. I mean, obviously, if you get enough people who just don't believe in it, it doesn't happen. I mean, the most extraordinary thing in the world are actually individuals and people. I don't think things get done by committee.
That's for sure.
Einstein wasn't hanging around waiting for some governmental agency to give him some ideas about nuclear physics. All these things, there's no great committees. there's only great people. That's
right.
Absolutely. That's my belief at all.
Absolutely, yeah.
So look, we've been talking for quite a while here. Any parting thoughts? Anything you'd like to tell the audience before we sign off for the evening?
Well, yeah, my book, Maharishi and Me, is a very unusual book because people don't really understand what it's like to be in the presence of a true spiritual master. And I really give the feeling of what it was like, and also the cult-like aspects of it as well, which it did become quite cult-like around the 1980s. And finally, I had to really simply break away from it. But it was a very interesting process whereby I started out as an extremely painfully shy teenager and then ended up really developing so many parts of myself that where I actually eventually became an author of 14 books and traveling all around the world teaching and speaking and also doing all these travel events and things like that. So I really changed a lot through meditation, through being with Maharishi, and through leaving Maharishi too. I really came into my own and became much more self-empowered. And that's really what I teach. I try to help people to become very greatly self-empowered.
Yeah,
that's really my message.
That is what it's all about, like
yes.
The Beatles said, all you need is love. Money doesn't hurt, but basically it doesn't help in many situations either. So all you really do need is love. I want to thank you for joining us this evening. I had a lot of fun. I hope you did too.
I really enjoyed it. I loved our conversation. It was great, Michael.
All right. Well, good. I'm good. I'm glad that you did. If you'd like, you can email me, or I can call you at some other time. If you give me an email address after post-production, I can send you a link to the show, and you can have it in posterity, and you can actually see what my ugly face looks like. I
actually went to your website and saw it already.
Oh, okay. So you know. All right, the truth is out of the bag. That's it. I can only hide so much. Going into so much more video now rather than just audio. That's kind of how it is. I actually can't walk around just in my underwear here and do the show anymore. I actually put clothing on for this. So, so again, I want to thank you so much for joining us this evening. I have a wonderful evening, a wonderful time in life, and perhaps we can do something like this again.
I would love to, Michael. I really enjoyed it so much. I loved all your questions, and I love talking to you about the Kabbalah and all these things. That's great.
All right, excellent. Thanks again.
Thank you.
All right, folks. So look, you heard it here. That's pretty much it. That was Dr. Susan Shumsky. And again, let me get the info on her. I want you to make sure that you have the info on her, that you can get her books all on Amazon. That's that's her saying goodbye. I don't know what happened to it. I think I closed this sheet out, but that's fine. Anyway, we're going to go ahead and say goodnight tonight. And again, I want to thank everybody for joining us this evening. It was a pleasure to be here as always. And as I tend to say at the end of each broadcast, basically is that everything in life is possible. Fewer things are probable, but one thing is certain, and that's that you're alive. So go out and live life to its fullest, because tomorrow is promised to nobody. We'll see you next time around.
Welcome to the Michael Blum Show, where we talk about things you don't want to talk about. We talk about sex. We talk about politics. We talk spirituality and substance abuse. Join us by calling 800-699-0980. Think, speak, and be heard. Here now is Michael Blum.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to the Michael Blum Show. Sorry for that little fluke of an accident earlier on the show, but what the heck, you know? Hopefully everyone out there is listening to me anyway, so it won't make much of a difference. Anyway, you are listening to the Michael Blum Show, which is the premier show that broadcasts from Boca Raton every Tuesday evening at 8 p.m. We usually have guests set up, as we do tonight. The subject is sex. You know, people ask me why do I talk about sex so much, and I don't know why should I not? I mean, you know, I mean, it's what is it that's enjoyable? I mean, as I'm getting older, it's pretty much food, sex, and my grandchildren. They're the things that are the most important to me. So kind of things change quite a bit. So why do I talk about sex so much on this show? It's because, well, I like it, and it's an interesting stuff to talk about usually. Now, I want you to notice here, I'm growing this is my attempt at a Fu Manchu. How do you do? Because it's Brovember. I don't know if you know about this, but generally, guys, sorry to tell you this, but it is the truth that 50% of us will experience some type of prostate problem in our lives, and this is just to remind people that it's a good thing to donate to and to be aware of. Certainly, if you have anyone in your family that's had these issues or problems, it's really something that you ought to do. You ought to take heed of all of this and make sure that you know what's going on in your life, get tested, PSA, that whole 9 yards kind of a thing. So today we are going to be talking about sex yet again. But we're going to talk about a couple of different aspects of it today. We're going to talk about sexual addiction, and I have an expert who's going to be joining us momentarily, Tony Overbay, and he's a licensed marriage counselor. And, you know, if I'm doing this, I'm going to go get him on already here because I see him in the background. I want to make sure everything is cooking and doing well. How you doing this evening?
Hey, I am doing great. Michael, can you hear me okay?
I can hear you okay. We're a little bit kind of stifled on the video. Looks a little bit choppy, but we'll see what goes on with it. It could be either your upload speed or my download speed. I'm not really sure. But anyway, Tony he's a licensed marriage therapist, and he's a certified mindful habit coach, a CMHC.
You're correct.
Did I get that right?
Yeah, you did. I mean, the more letters that are my name, right, makes me sound very qualified.
Well, I guess so. There's a ton of letters and stuff like that in here. So anyway, he is a popular motivational speaker as well. He speaks at corporate training sessions, events, different schools, churches, formal and informal settings. He mixes some humor, clinical experience, his Christian faith, and a wealth of personal stories galore. So we want to welcome you to the show, sir.
Hey, thank you. I mean, it's an honor to be. We were thinking about this last week, but then the whole election thing happened, right? So
yeah.
I think that was why they bumped us back.
And now you got your voice back, so that sounds like it'll be even better.
Exactly. Yeah, thank you.
So again, I want to thank you for joining us today. You know, Before we talk about really sexual problems and sexual addiction, can you tell me what makes up a happy, healthy sexual relationship with a husband and wife? Maybe important to
Boy,
let
okay.
people know that.
You jumped right in. I mean, let me get my soapbox out because this is one of the topics I like to talk about. I mean, so a podcast on this, and it's this concept called the levels of intimacy. And so initially, when we meet our partner, we're attracted physically, right? And that's kind of, we think someone's attractive, and we want to get their number. We use our best lines, and let's say everything works out great, and we're married. So we've got this physical attraction, this physical intimacy. But now what we know kind of over time, some nice evidence-based shows that really and a relationship is best when it is formed with psychological intimacy at its core, which is honesty, loyalty, trust, commitment. And then, but above that is this verbal intimacy. So can you just talk with your partner? Can you just talk about anything? In those days in young love when you would just talk to each other for hours. And so what happens is, so we meet at this physical level, but sometimes we go down and we're trying to talk to our partner, and it doesn't go well. We can connect physically, right? And then up above the verbal intimacy is emotional intimacy. So now let's say that we're trying to pour out our heart to our partner, and they say, they don't like what we're sharing, or they think, I can't believe you just said that, or I didn't know that you really felt. And then it doesn't feel right in the relationship, so we jump back up to the physical intimacy. So we go to this place where anytime we're in the relationship, we jump back up and we try to center ourselves in the physical intimacy. But over time, that is, there's always going to be a withdrawal. There's always going to be that part is never quite on equal ground. And so then you've got different times, each partner that is trying to jump back up to physical and something is not going right in the relationship. So when you say what makes a happy, healthy relationship, in my opinion, and doing this for a long time now, is changing that whole relationship with intimacy. Because then when you build your relationship on the psychological intimacy, honesty, loyalty, trust, commitment, when you feel like that's set, then you can go up to that verbal intimacy. Feel like you can talk to your partner about anything. When that's connected, then you can connect on an emotional. Feel like you can share your hopes and dreams, and your partner's not going to shut them down. Above that is this cognitive and intellectual intimacy, which means that one of you can be a PhD and one of you can basically be a dullard, connected on these levels that, it's okay. And above that is the spiritual intimacy, where one of you can be, completely opposite faith, maybe atheist, agnostic, whatever. But it's like we're so connected. And then the top level is the byproduct of all those is intimacy. And I think that's a level, Michael, that I'm trying to get my clients to, where they're not just always saying, if we had more intimacy, we'd be better at all these areas. I'm trying to say, no, if we're better at all these other areas, we have incredible intimate connection.
It's crazy because I can't think in that many levels, because I guess maybe you can figure out who in the relationship is the dullard, but
Sure.
but I kind of, there's this thing when you meet someone, there's like that big adrenaline rush and you get very excited, and then there's this just for men in particular, this unbelievable lust. And then you go through this thing like where it's like that goo-goo-eyed kind of, you're the best thing in the world, and where were you before, and I'm going to be with you forever, and we're walking down the midway, eating the cotton candy, all of that stuff. And then there needs to be a third component, and that's always the one that gets me, and that's what is the piece in there that once you have all that makes, for lack of a better word, a stick-to-itiveness, or that long-term piece that goes on that makes marriages successful or fall apart. Because the mind is nuts. Oh, I love that woman, she's the most beautiful thing in the world, I can't believe it, and 5 weeks later it's that goddamn bitch. Can you be that wrong in life? And obviously with enough chemical infusion in your brain, either legally or illegally,
Sure.
you can think and do whatever you want.
Yeah, and so and I have to tell you, and I don't know if you're ready to go to this place yet, but addiction at its core, I mean, what I have noticed over the years is, so I felt called into this profession to work with men, to help them become better husbands and fathers. And I always kind of tell the joke, the bit, that then when I got to grad school, lay that out to my class, the women in the class would go, oh, what an admirable trait. And then the professors would kind of laugh, and they're all working professionals. And it was because guys wouldn't come to therapy, So then what that did, when I got out into practice, I started seeing guys, but it's primarily for addiction. It's for pornography addiction, compulsive sexual behavior. So then I start realizing the addiction often is the byproduct of it's not the core problem. And that core problem is not feeling authentic or not feeling connected in their relationships, not feeling connected as a father, not feeling connected with their career, their health, their faith, you name it. And so when they feel that uncomfortable, not connected in their life, they turn to whether it's porn, sex, food, drugs, alcohol, rock and roll, whatever it is, so then I'm trying to then down this path of, okay, I need to help guys have better marriages. So then I do a deep dive on what is the most evidence-based couples therapy modality, and it's this one called emotionally focused therapy, EFT. And the reason I go into all this is because it's like EFT is about having a framework to community partner your hopes, your dreams, your frustrations, because I do feel like you're right. When we're in that Google-eyed phase, we are put elves out there. We really are. So then if there's ever time feel like, I don't know, I got to bring this topic up, we're like, okay, that's not the person she married, she's going to leave me, so then we bury these feelings, we bury these emotions because we don't have a framework to be able to say, hey, here's my train of thought, because we're worried if we're emotional, we're vulnerable, that she's going to be like, that's not the guy I married, and she's going to bolt,
Mm-hmm.
So I mean, I think that's what you're talking about is then, so you hold that in for a little while and all of a sudden it just explodes because you've been building this resentment. She doesn't even know that she's done anything wrong, or you don't know you've done anything wrong. You didn't know you were being tested, and all of a sudden it just comes out of nowhere with, I can't believe you do this and this. And so my goal is to try to help couples have this better framework to communicate, because then that leads the guy to feeling like he's more connected, which leads him not to feeling like he's got to turn to the addiction.
It's crazy. I can't tell you how many times I've heard people say, like, I wish you would open up. This is usually a woman to a man. Let me know what's on your mind. And then the guy starts to do that. And after a minute or two of the woman listening to this, they're like glazed over, yawning. And they really don't want to hear that too much. You know?
Okay, so I like, that, or it's even like, okay, he's like, okay, honestly, I don't like when we go, I don't know, I can't even think of an example off the top of my head. I don't like when we, go to chick flicks or whatever, and so she said, I want you to open up to me. And then he does, he's vulnerable. I do this dumb thing because when I'm speaking, he's like, okay, here's a little bit of my heart, right? I'm going to trust you with it. And then if she responds with, seriously, like, you don't like those? I mean, with how much those mean to me? So he's not about to go offering his heart out again the next time.
Sure.
So the couples modality I use is you're changing the whole paradigm of the way they communicate. So, and I want you to open up to me. And then he says, I don't like chick flicks. I'm working with her as well, because she's got to respond to that emotional bid and with empathy. It's like, okay, I asked him for his opinion, and then it could be like, tell me more. Tell me why you don't like them, because you always go to them with me, and I feel like we were on the same page. And then if he's like, I don't know, when I was young, my parents told me they were getting a divorce, and while I was watching a chick flick, so it's a trigger to me every time, And so now she's thinking, okay, why didn't you ever tell me this, right?
Sure.
And because he's thinking, well, if I would have told you that, you would have left, So I'm trying to get a different modality of a way to communicate.
No cheese, no nothing. And